What happens when a luxury-loving young man marries a wealthy businesswoman, intending to inherit her fortune? Samuel Johnson, a scheming young black man, decided to marry a wealthy elderly woman to pull off a scam and take all her money. However, he underestimated the elderly lady and didn't believe in the life lesson she imparted to him. Samuel was a 23-year-old who always despised working. He had been supported by his parents for as long as he could manage, but the couple, realizing their son would stay there forever if they allowed it, forced him to get a job and move out. Under their pressure, Samuel found a job at a cafe and consistently arrived late, routinely displaying a lack of courtesy towards customers. Deep down, the man was unhappy and hated this life because he loved having money to buy expensive clothes and go to luxurious places, but he was always broke. Additionally, the young man didn't like spending the little money he earned from his job, often relying on others to pay his bills and indulgences. Despite being physically favored, he rarely found a woman willing to do that for him. Overall, Samuel led a monotonous life, going from home to work and from work to home. However, it was due to an unexpected customer at his cafe that everything changed. He was used to seeing everyday workers, ordinary people who just grabbed their coffee and hurried to their next destination. However, this customer was different. A luxurious car parked in front of the venue, and the driver stepped out to open the rear door, clearing the way for his boss. A woman with white hair and wrinkles emerged, unapologetically displaying her age. She was impeccably dressed and walked straight to the cafe, patiently waiting in line for her turn. Samuel was serving one customer after another without bothering to look at their faces. But by some twist of fate, this time he glanced ahead and found himself face to face with the sophisticated lady. Observing her attire and the accompanying security personnel, Samuel quickly realized she wasn't just any customer. That's when his demeanor changed. A fake, automatic smile appeared on his face, followed by a politely uttered phrase. "Hello, how may I assist you on this beautiful afternoon?" The lady simply requested a plain espresso for herself and a tea for her driver. Processing everything in the same minute and personally fetching their order, Samuel was unrecognizable as he had never performed his job so masterfully before. While handing over the hot beverages, the young man even threw in a subtle flirtation, leaving her flattered. And he didn't stop there. "You know, I can see that you're clearly a businesswoman. I wonder if you could give me an opportunity. I'm open to any role that can help me advance my career." "I feel like I'm limiting myself here," said Samuel, looking deep into the woman's eyes. She hadn't expected this when ordering a simple coffee, but realized he seemed dedicated, and it wouldn't hurt to give him a chance. Delicately, the lady opened her purse and pulled out a business card, handing it to the young man before leaving promptly. The card featured her name and her business contact number, and upon realizing he had secured an opportunity, Samuel felt excited and, for the first time in years, had hope for the near future. The next morning, Samuel decided to finally call the number he had received. "Miss Emily's office. How may I assist you?" said the voice on the other end of the line. The young man explained his story, and the secretary confirmed that she had already been informed and was expecting his call. A job interview was scheduled for the next day at 4 p.m., and without even knowing the specific position, he accepted without questioning. However, Samuel dedicated himself and arrived even before the office opened. He managed to make himself heard by Miss Emily, the same woman who answered at the cafe and owned the office. Typically, she didn't conduct interviews, but the young man was so insistent that she decided to make an exception. The fact is that she was enchanted by Samuel, not for his looks, but for his communication skills and the immense focus he demonstrated on his goals. Additionally, he dressed well and seemed to carry himself as a true gentleman in any environment or situation. Miss Emily had no doubt he would be hired and directed to the sales department of her office, responsible for going door to door to offer their products. The elderly woman was an excellent boss and managed one of the largest sports equipment sales networks in the country, despite having no interest in sports, let alone in business, when she took over the business about 13 years ago after her husband, the founder of the place, passed away, leaving her with his entire empire. Despite the lack of business experience and amateurism, the company had never been better, leading everyone to believe that the elderly woman had a natural talent for it. Samuel didn't know the details of the story but deduced it by looking at the old photos on the wall of Miss Emily with a man who appeared to be the same age as her. He also noticed the absence of a wedding ring on her finger, and although the woman was well maintained, he judged that she was over 70 years old. Thus, he decided to try to seduce the elderly woman and make her fall in love with him. He imagined that due to wrinkles and age, she wouldn't have many years left, therefore, he could marry her, wait a few years until her death, and inherit her substantial wealth and conglomerate of companies. The young man didn't feel guilty about deceiving the sweet woman who had extended a helping hand to him. He didn't care that he would manipulate and lie for a few years, as he anticipated a great reward in the end. And that was all the shallow man cared about: status and money. The plan seemed to be working. Samuel had never dedicated himself so much in his life, and even without work experience, he worked as a salesman and managed to bring in 2 major clients for the company, surprising everyone, including Miss Emily, with his sweet and polite manner. The young man could manipulate everyone around him and convince them to do exactly what he wanted. The contracts he had secured would bring a good profit for Miss Emily, and as a reward, the elderly woman decided to take the young man to dinner at one of the city's best restaurants to encourage him to continue his excellent work. During this dinner, the young man gave his best. Samuel seduced and complimented the lady all night, who didn't take long to succumb to the charms of the handsome young man, reciprocating his flirts. They talked a lot. During the meal, he lied about a false, hard-working journey, and she shared stories about the foundation of her company with her late husband and all their adventures around the world. A few weeks later, as they continued to go out occasionally and get to know each other better, the young man decided to take a risk and go all in. Samuel chose the right moment and asked his boss to be his girlfriend. Miss Emily's face showed astonishment and surprise. Despite going out regularly, he had always been very respectful and never even tried to kiss her. Therefore, a request for a relationship was quite unexpected. She tried to resist, saying that it would be absurd for a boss to date an employee. But Samuel and his strong persuasive power managed to extract a final yes as an answer. The elderly woman was surprised that a young man like him wanted to be with an older lady like her, but she was so happy that she didn't reflect on it further. She simply accepted the proposal and celebrated into the night. After that, Samuel knew that his plan was progressing as planned, but the next part would require extreme delicacy and care not to reveal his true intentions. He dedicated himself to his relationship, taking the lady to places she didn't even know existed, introducing her to new parts of the city and tourist attractions he himself had always wanted to visit but never had the money for. With such affection and care from the young man towards the elderly woman, it was only a matter of time before Miss Emily fell deeply in love with Samuel. It was impossible for her not to feel more alive whenever she was with him, experiencing new things, meeting incredible people, and rediscovering the true meaning of living. Whether she wanted it or not, her late husband had always devoted much more to his businesses than to his family. Despite always being in her company, he wasn't the most attentive husband and chose not to have children, undergoing a vasectomy when he was younger to avoid problems in the future, leaving Miss Emily without heirs. After his death, the elderly woman became even more alone and reclusive, living exclusively for the business. The woman then decided to do something out of character, an extravagance she wasn't accustomed to. She rented the best penthouse in the city for a weekend and invited Samuel without revealing the occasion. The young man was surprised when he arrived at the hotel by helicopter. He had never flown before and had no idea what awaited him. Miss Emily, waiting for him, invited him in, and after a few minutes, she made the most unusual decision of her life. On the hotel balcony, she proposed to Samuel. The young man was surprised by this, but he quickly responded, yes, leaving Miss Emily extremely pleased with tears in her eyes. Samuel hadn't expected his plan to work so well to the point that she would propose to him. However, despite all the happiness, the lady noticed the rude way he treated the hotel staff who came to welcome them at the door. She thought it might be her impression, and that he hadn't been rude at all, but it raised a red flag in her perception, making her more attentive to Samuel's future actions. However, what she hadn't actually noticed was the amount of money he spent every week on frivolous items since he started dating Miss Emily. The man walked around dressed in designer clothes and watches that looked more like jewelry. The young man already walked and behaved as if he were a true millionaire, appearing as if the adaptation to the luxurious lifestyle was no hindrance at all. On the contrary, anyone looking from the outside would even think that Samuel was born and raised in this lifestyle. All of this went unnoticed by the elderly woman, as she did not check her bank account or credit card statements daily. However, the elderly lady's bank manager noticed the unusual transactions and immediately called her to verify the situation and make sure everything was fine. Despite being very wealthy for many decades, Emily was born poor in a small, humble village in the interior of her country. A hard worker from the beginning, she worked in all sorts of professions before her late husband's business became successful. In fact, she supported the household during her husband's attempts to make his business happen, as for years the company was nothing more than a plan on paper. She continued working and giving part of her salary for him to invest in his dream because she believed that with such perseverance, he would make it work. And so he did. After years, the company started making profits, and the woman stopped working, washing and ironing clothes for others, and became the majority shareholder. With the tragic death of her husband, she became the sole owner of the entire empire. But her whole journey of struggle made the elderly woman never care about all the money she had. She only made investments in her own business and set aside all the houses, cars and jewelry she could acquire, limiting herself to basic comfort and possessing only what she needed. Extravagances like renting an expensive hotel and a helicopter to pick up Samuel were extremely rare, if not unique. Despite everything, the marriage of the young man to Emily was simple, with no party or anything of the sort, just a small dinner at her house. With that, the bank manager called her only to check if everything was okay and if those expensive purchases had been made by her, as he had never seen so much money leaving the account as he was seeing now. It was at that moment that Mrs. Emily questioned and raised suspicions about her current husband's real intentions. Already suspicious of long cell phone calls and spending hours, sometimes even days, away from home, the elderly woman began to feel apprehensive that he was interested solely in her money. With that eating her up inside, she was living in anguish and afraid of being deceived all these months. Had the elderly lady made a mistake in marrying the young man, to try to continue her life peacefully and end her anxieties, Mrs. Emily decided to get the contact of a private detective from a friend of hers who pursued the man for a few weeks and photographed all his days. When the humble woman received the detective's final report, she couldn't believe her eyes. Due to his remarkable demonstration of competence, Samuel had been transferred to another branch of the company a few months ago to supervise other managers and employees. But the truth was that he hadn't shown up for work in weeks. Every day when leaving the old lady's house, saying he was going to work, the man was meeting another woman and going to parties and restaurants practically every week. In short, he was always cheating on Mrs. Emily, using her fortune and the company's corporate card to buy outrageously expensive gifts for his lover. The tears streaming down the elderly woman's face were the least of her worries compared to her expression of disappointment when she saw all those photos and bank transactions. All her trust had been broken. The result of trying to live again had been a disaster, and she felt more used and deceived than she had ever felt in her entire life. How'd he do this to me? To say that he loved me in one moment and go out to betray me with a younger woman in another, she thought to herself, reflecting on how naive she had been and how blinded she was by the passion and illusion of a handsome young man. Despite all the sadness of continuing her life, she knew that this could not stand, and she immediately began to devise a way to get back at the selfish and deceitful Samuel, promising that this would not go unpunished. Her first move was to block all his personal credit cards that were in his possession, and also immediately disconnect him from the company without notifying him. After that, the first time the man tried to use the card to pay for dinner with his lover, it was denied. Incredulous at the situation, he just joked that it was a mistake by the card issuer and that it always happened due to errors in the machine, blaming the restaurant employee and handing him another card. 3 attempts later, embarrassment and tension weighed heavily on the atmosphere. I bet this is because of some incompetence on your part. You know, if you worked for my company, you'd be out on the street today, Samuel said to the humble and friendly waiter, who just apologized and said he would be right back. On his return, he brought the manager of the place, who asked if the man had any cash to pay, as his cards were clearly having issues. The young man tried to call his wife, Mrs. Emily, but she didn't answer the phone at all, leaving the man alone in that situation. After the threat to call the police and the risk of spending a night in jail, Samuel left his documents and his cell phone with the manager and promised to come back the next day to settle the bill. To avoid more embarrassment in the crowded restaurant, the manager accepted. The man was furious. He didn't understand what had happened, but in his mind, his plan was still working perfectly and going exactly as he wanted, so he tried to move on and just resolve the situation as best as possible. Upon arriving home, he questioned his wife about why that had happened and the unanswered calls. She denied knowing the reason, said it was probably a bank issue, and mentioned that she would call the next day to resolve it. Samuel tried to disguise it, but he couldn't contain his anger. It was at that moment that Mrs. Emily could look at the young man as he really was, without the enchantment filter that she had placed on him. She saw what he cared about, and she wouldn't let all his lies and betrayals go unanswered. The next day, she did go to the bank, but not to solve the problem with the credit card, but to change her marriage contract and inheritance. With no children and her family already deceased, everyone always questioned what would happen to that money and all the woman's businesses, which were now confidential between her, her lawyer, and her bank manager. Unfortunately, her vengeful plan was interrupted by a sudden death. Only a few close employees knew, but Emily had been dealing with cancer for about 3 years. Between improvements and setbacks, she knew her days were numbered, and her end was near. The elderly woman departed to the other side, sad and feeling betrayed by the last person she trusted. But knowing that she was close to saying goodbye forever, she left a letter with her faithful driver, bidding her last farewell and her last assignments to him. In the face of his wife's death, Samuel began to behave like a sad widower, wearing an expensive black suit and sunglasses so that no one could see the absence of tears in his eyes. The will was read during her funeral as requested in Mrs. Emily's letter. The venue was crowded with company employees and shareholders who were concerned about the future of her company. The text began by thanking everyone for their presence and expressing that at least now she would have true happiness, meeting her late husband in the afterlife and being able to stay together for eternity, which brought an uncomfortable atmosphere as everyone stared at Samuel. Regarding her company, it would be divided equally among all current shareholders, mentioning that they had always assisted the elderly woman, and that thanks to the good guidance and decisions made by the board, she departed for the afterlife, seeing her company more powerful and strong than ever. In this way, she trusted that they would do a great job. As for her fortune, it was revealed that the amounts in her account were more than anyone thought. Despite people believing in her innocence and lack of knowledge, she had been a tremendous investor for years and had unbelievable profits from the stakes and sales of other companies she helped set up. However, all this money would go to the creation of a non-profit organization responsible for sheltering street children, covering not only their stay, food and clothes until the age of 18, but also their education at prestigious universities and a guaranteed position in one of her companies. The same expression of hatred and fury from Samuel the previous day returned to his face as the reading unfolded, indignant for not receiving any part of the company or fortune. He awaited the fate of the properties and cars, which together were worth much more than he could ever spend for the rest of his life. However, to his surprise, all these would be sold, and the money raised would be donated to existing charities. When the will finally mentioned Samuel, a big thank you began. The late Mrs. Emily made it clear about the man's importance in her final days, stating that thanks to him she had experienced incredible and unusual things, seen beautiful places, and had contact with things and people she didn't even know existed. For that, she was grateful. Mrs. Emily also believed she had made the man very happy, and for that reason she had left one of the most important items she could leave for him. He received a key, which according to the will, would lead to a safe deposit box in the country's most renowned bank. A sly smile appeared on Samuel's face. He would finally own some jewelry collection or real estate deeds. All the guests applauded him in a final homage to Emily and probably thought Samuel had taken the largest slice of her inheritance. The days passed, and with the sale of the properties and cars, Samuel decided to go to the bank once and for all to check his long-awaited inheritance. He was well received by the manager, who said everyone was waiting for his presence. The young man was led to the safest floor of the place, and as a privacy measure, the employees left him alone in the room, exiting and asking him to call them when he was ready to leave. His great anxiety made Samuel open the steel safe as quickly as possible, expecting diamonds and other jewels. However, what he saw inside the cabinet made the man almost fall backward. Inside the safe was an espresso cup, the same one Samuel served Mrs. Emily on the day they met. The drink was already cold and accompanied by a simple note that said, "Hope you enjoy the bitter taste. With love, your deceased wife." The young man understood the message instantly. She knew about his plan. She always knew. She had left that coffee cup as a mockery for Samuel, a way of responding to everything he had done, all his lies and betrayals, which resulted in nothing more than sheer frustration and a cup of unsweetened coffee. The man couldn't believe it. He was exactly where he had started, without money and without a job. He was devastated, crying while screaming, not knowing what to do anymore. Everyone had realized his charade. He became known throughout the city after the embarrassment he caused, and never managed to achieve the social ascent he desired. Not even the cafe where he worked wanted him back. Mrs. Emily died happy, remembering that she had already found her soulmate before in her life, which was her late husband, and that Samuel had been just an opportunist who in the end didn't get what he wanted.